was one more very interesting case where the wife used to think that the patient has gone crazy. He wanted to blow his head off. He used to get it only in spring and fall. So sometimes it is also during weather and the changes which occur. He thought that he's getting a sinus headache. Usually whenever we get a headache, we say it is a sinus headache. But it was excruciating. There was unilateral eye pain of short duration. Patient used to get out of bed. Like in migraine, they feel better when they go off and go off to sleep. But out here, he used to get off the bed and used to engage himself in self-destructive behavior like throwing pillows and this all. So what is the diagnosis? Thank you so much. So it is cluster headache, and since it is not covered, they have covered, but we had a lecture on cluster headache, but Dr. Deshmukh, he didn't come. Out here in cluster, there is severe eye pain, which occurs for less than 2 hours. Patient becomes very, very active during headache. That time he does not prefer going off to sleep, but it is usually they become very active, and it usually occurs 80 to 90 minutes after they go off to sleep. They occur in clusters, say 4 to 6 weeks, and then for months and years there is no pain. Autonomic symptoms do occur, but patients usually do not tell anything else except that they have a severe eye pain. So this is cluster headache. This was a female 75 years old who suffered from migraine for her whole life. For her whole life, then it stopped at 50 and then again it started. So it was unbelievable, but she said that these are like a spike growing through my eye and on my right forehead. My sinuses, I think again it is a sinus headache, and there are certain aggravating factors present. Along with that, mind age is given, and along with that she has cervical problems also. What it can be? Exactly. So one should look for the secondary causes also. Age is the first factor, because she said she used to get headache. It went off after her pregnancy, but again it occurred after 50 years of age. So sometimes it is hormone related also. This headache was after 50 years. It was a new type of headache. So as previously explained, blood tests and MRI play a very important role in these patients. So this patient was diagnosed as temporal arteritis, and then steroids helped her a lot, and she got relieved after giving the treatment. So these were the few examples which I wanted to say. Thank you so much. Thank you, madam.
Ma'am, you just give your presentation there in the preview room. Given, na? Then, okay. Check it. Yeah, please.
He has kept it. I don't know. I have given it. He's copied it.
Hall C, it is
This is Hall C.
Off because we had to complete it before 6 o'clock. Myself, Dr. R. Gurumurthy. So I am pain physician, practicing myself in Trichy, and also working as a consultant pain physician for Daradia, the Pain Clinic of Kolkata, and visiting faculty for the academic courses in Daradia. I has been associated almost for the last 5 years with Dr. Gautam Das. I had been with him in releasing 3 of his books, and today evening we are releasing the second book of volume 2 of Common Pain Management Procedures. That will be the video book which is supposed to be released today evening. So we will be starting off this session. So this already they are given 15 minutes for each speaker. To cut short, I ask my speakers to get it done in 10 minutes if possible. I'm requesting, I'm not just giving order, I'm just requesting. I think it is a simple topic. it's pharmacotherapy and above. It's a very simple topic, but if you don't need this simple basic, you can't be a pain physician. Intervention is always not the solution for pain. So we should have a very broad knowledge on pharmacotherapy and its adjuvants. Adjuvants really play a good role whenever there was some crisis. So I will invite our chairperson, Dr. Nipa Patel. Please take your chair, ma'am. So she is the assistant professor, anesthesiology and pain management. She is working in Surat Municipal Institute of Medical Education and Research, Surat. She is also working as a pain specialist in Rajat Hospital. And we had got another chairperson, Dr. Pankaj Wadhwa. Pankaj Wadhwa is not here. I think Dr. Pankaj Surange may be joining in few hours. Maybe she is busy in Hall A. He'll be coming and joining with us. We invite our first speaker, Dr. Ramamurthy. A small introduction, it is MD Anesthesiology in 2012. He's got the gold medal in the MD exam. He's in Dharadian. He has been trained for 3 months fellowship in Dharadia Pain Clinic. And now he is working as assistant professor in Department of Anesthesia and Pain in Yenipoya Medical College, Mangalore, Karnataka. And he is doing really a good job as a young pain physician in Mangalore. I know him personally. He is a good chap. He is good in academics. His speaks follows. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So the topic given to me is the newer drugs in management of pain. So why do we need new drugs? Aren't we happy with the drugs that we have at this point of time? We need new drugs because the problem is serious. The pain problem is serious. It's considered as a global burden, and the existing drugs that we have is not adequate, or if at all is adequate, there are serious problems with the existing drugs. So what are the problems with the drugs that we already have? We have opioids we extensively use. Although we use opioids, it's not effective for neuropathic pain. Even though if it's effective, it has to be used in very high doses, and using in very high doses causes addiction, tolerance, and hyperalgesia. We know that opioid induces hyperalgesia. So COX-2 inhibitors, NSAIDs, they cause cardiovascular effects. Neuropathic pain medications like pregabalin, gabapentin, they are effective only in few portion of patients and associated with side effects like dizziness, drowsiness, and nausea. So unfortunately, at this point of time, we have only 3 classes of analgesics. I'm not talking about co-analgesics. We have only 3 classes of analgesics: opioids, NSAIDs, and paracetamol. We know the mechanism of opioids. We know the mechanism of NSAIDs. Paracetamol is still thinking what's the mechanism. We don't know exactly. Co-analgesics, we have few group of drugs, and exactly we don't know in which condition we have to use what drug. So coming to so this is a scenario that we don't have much of drugs in our armamentarium. So what I'm going to discuss about the drugs are still in the experimental trial or in a research stage. So at this point of time, there are no drugs that we can use clinically. So coming to the opioid receptors, instead of talking about the newer drugs, so newer targets, what can be targeted for the pain relief, we'll discuss in that way. So we know that the mu agonists are the most potent pain relieving drugs, but they have a very narrow therapeutic range. We have good analgesia, that is because of the mu agonism. At the same time, we have sedation, respiratory depression, constipation, is also because of the mu receptor agonism. So there is research going on to find an alternative receptor, that is a kappa agonism. Mainly the peripherally acting kappa agonism gives good amount of pain relief. Drugs like CR665 and CR845, they're still in a phase 2 trial for the postoperative pain. At the same time, kappa antagonism can cause pain relief by opioid decreasing the morphine tolerance and relieving the opioid induced hyperalgesia. And one of the drug that can be used to relieve this opioid induced hyperalgesia is the buprenorphine. So we know that buprenorphine is buprenorphine, we all know that we are using this, but the new mechanism of action, the buprenorphine, the most explored mechanism of action is that the kappa antagonism, which we can use it in case of opioid-induced hyperalgesia and in opioid tolerance. The advantages with the buprenorphine is that it acts at the spinal level, so less chance of respiratory depression. Another type of receptors that have been discovered are the opioid receptor-like receptors. So these receptors are similar to mu receptors, and they are G protein coupled receptors, and activation of these receptors will cause decrease in the cyclic AMP level, closure of the calcium channels, and the opening of the potassium channels, causing hyperpolarization and decreasing the neuronal excitability. So basically they decrease the excitability of the neurons. So buprenorphine, again, it has been shown to act on these receptors as well. Next important receptors that can be targeted are the histamine receptors. So histamine receptor agonist and antagonist. So both have been tried. So H3R receptors they are the autoreceptors which are present at the pre and postsynaptic neurons. So so activation in the skin can cause decreased release of CGRP and substance P. So in that way they have an anti-inflammatory effects. Okay, in the spinal cord, these receptors inhibit the nociceptive response to the mechanical and the inflammatory stimuli. At the supraspinal level, they cause antagonism and they cause histamine release, and in that way they cause pain relief. Cannabinoids. The cannabinoid receptors CB1 and CB2. CB1, we know that they are involved in the pain. CB2 receptors, they are mainly involved in the immune system. The exact mechanism in the pain we don't know. And the endogenous cannabinoid, we know it's anandamide, it is involved in pain relief. We have non-selective cannabinoids, non-selective CB1 cannabinoid receptor agonists like tetrahydrocannabinol and Sativex have been shown to be effective in neuropathic pain. The Sativex has been approved in Canada in 2005 for neuropathic pain also, and it has been US FDA approved for the phase 3 trial for the cancer pain. This phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trial, usually a drug will undergo 4 trials. There are 4 phases of the trial. So initially it will undergo a preclinical trial. So in a preclinical trial, all the drugs will be tested on the non-human these things. That means in the animals they'll be tried for the safety and pharmacokinetics, and then they'll undergo a phase 0 trial, so where the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics will be tested, and in phase 1 trial the dosage of these drugs will be tested, and in phase 2 and phase 3 trial they'll be tested for the efficacy and safety. Coming to the disease modifying drugs, till now we saw the drugs which act on the receptor on one particular point in the pain pathway. Okay, so disease modifying drugs, they not only decrease the pain, but they also alter the pathophysiology of the which is causing the pain. So one of those disease modifying drugs are the neurotropic factor, artemisinin. It's a member of the glial derived neurotropic factor, GDNF, and it improves the neuronal surviving. Okay, so it has been shown to relieve the allodynia and hyperalgesia in rat models of neuropathic pain. Okay, similarly, the neuronal growth factor antagonist. The neuronal growth factor has been linked in the generation of pain and central sensitization. Okay, so the newer drug, that is tanezumab, has been proved successfully in phase 2 trial for the OA knee pain. Sodium channel blockers, we have currently lignocaine and carbamazepine are the sodium channel blockers for the treatment of pain. The newer sodium channel blockers that we have are the lacosamide and ralfinamide, which are orally active. We can use these drugs orally as well, and they are non-selective sodium channel blockers. Drugs which affect the descending facilitation. So we know that descending inhibitory pathway, which is an important inhibitory modulation that we have for pain. At the same time, there are descending facilitatory pathway also. So just like that, we have descending inhibitory pathway, we have descending excitatory or facilitatory pathway, which tend to increase the pain intensity. They originate from the brain, and they play major role in the maintenance of the chronic pain. Okay, and these fibers, they express NK1, that is neurokinin 1 receptors, and they form a bulbospinobulbar loop, and they tend to activate the 5-HT3 receptors. So what antagonists we have for the 5-HT3? We have ondansetron, very well, and we know all these ondansetron and tropisetron that we use for as anti-emetic drugs. So these ondansetron has been shown to reduce pain scores in neuropathic pain. We can very well use in near future with more evidence is ondansetron and tropisetron. The potassium channel blockers. So potassium channel blockers, retigabin is an anticonvulsant drug, is effective in preclinical models. Again, glial cell inhibitors. So glial cells are not just supporting cells. Evidence is building up the glial cells. They're not only the cementing cells, they also take active part in the initiation and maintenance of the chronic pain. These glial cells known to release the TNF alpha and interleukin 1 beta. Especially the TNF alpha, it has been shown that it is not released by the spinal cord neurons. It is exclusively secreted by the glial cells and astrocytes. So similarly, we have minocycline. It's an antibiotic which inhibits microglia, and propentophyllin, which inhibits astrocytes, providing neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory actions. So interleukins, not all interleukins are pro-nociceptive. We have anti-nociceptive interleukin as well. So interleukin 10 is an anti-nociceptive interleukin. Interleukin 1 and 6 are pro-nociceptive. Okay, so interleukin 10 in a synthetic interleukin 10 can be utilized for painful conditions, and at the current point of time, the interleukin 10 that is being studied is not a stable one. It doesn't crosses the blood-brain barrier. The synthetic polymers can be used to deliver this interleukin, which can cross the blood-brain barrier and gives more long-lasting pain relief. Leukotriene receptor antagonists, which have been used in the treatment of bronchial asthma, like montelukast, has also been shown to have a good analgesic effect by reducing the levels of interleukin 1 and interleukin 6. Another novel method of group of drugs used for pain relief is pro-resolution lipid mediators. So these drugs are involved in the neuroinflammation driven chronic pain. Okay, so we know that neuroinflammation, not talking about neurogenic inflammation, it's neuroinflammation which is which has important role in the development of chronic pain. Neurogenic inflammation is a local inflammatory reaction which involves the CGRP and substance P, and it's a pathogenesis for the migraine. Whereas neuroinflammation, any peripheral nerve injury or a tissue injury, will cause inflammatory reaction in the central nervous system. So that is neuroinflammation. So neuroinflammation plays a key role in the maintenance of chronic pain, and how this neuroinflammation is generated and maintained, mainly because of the glial cells. Again, TNF alpha and interleukin 1 beta are involved in the neuroinflammation. So what these pro-resolution lipid mediators do? So we have two classes of pro-resolution lipid mediators, that is resolvins and protectins. So resolvin D1, D2 and E1, and protectin D1. So they are also called as neuroprotectins. They are derived from our the dietary fat, that is omega-3 fatty acids, and they'll be degraded by the lipoxygenases 5 and 10 to these resolvins and protectins, but in a very, very small amount. So peripheral administration of these resolvins in experimental mice effectively prevented the inflammatory pain. Okay, and intrathecal administration of resolvins at the dose 100 times less than that of the morphine has shown to reduce significant amount of pain. So these resolution lipid mediators have been used in neuropathic pain also. Okay, so they prevented mechanical allodynia in a mouse model of neuropathic pain, which took higher doses of gabapentin to treat the same kind of pain. At the same time, these protectins and resolvins, they are helpful in even the neuroinflammation as well. that is in synaptic plasticity and neuroinflammation. Synaptic plasticity is the altered neuronal excitation. So altered neuronal excitation is called as synaptic plasticity, and one of the subtype of the neurosynaptic plasticity is the long-term potentiation. So advantages of the pro-resolution lipid mediators are they have high potency. I told that the 100 times less than the dose of the morphine is required. They have a wide safety window, and they have multiple mechanism of action. So disadvantages, they're metabolically unstable, and they have a short duration of action, and duration can be prolonged by developing a more stable form of PRLMs, improving the delivery methods by using nanoparticles. And alternative strategy is to boost the production of endogenous PRLMs from healthy diet rich in omega fatty acids. As I told that they can be improved with the dietary changes by eating good fats which has more of omega-3 fatty acids. So eating good fat, the studies have been shown to control the migraine. That's a dietary control of chronic migraine headache. Okay. So this is the pathway where it is where how these PRLMs are synthesized. The dietary essential fats, which has omega-3 unsaturated fatty acids, they have been converted to the resolvins and protectants with the help of lipoxygenases. So in conclusion, so pain is a complex phenomenon. Pain mechanisms are not fully understood, and new theories are being proposed every day. So currently available drugs for pain management are limited, and newer drugs are still in the experimental stage. So understanding the mechanisms and pathophysiology in greater detail is needed for the development of the new drugs. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ramamurthy. Maybe we have the discussion at the end, and maybe whatever the drugs he had told are just in the experimental phase. Maybe after 10 years we will have this drug. At that time, Ramamurthy may be saying, I told it on 10 years back, now it's there. Maybe it will have the name of some fin or ol. Most of the drugs on our opiates will have that ending as fin, XXX fin. So Ramamurthy may be saying, I told 6CR585, that is the drug which is now. Okay. Maybe whatever the drugs, armamentarium is available in worldwide, we are still lagging in opioids. We had got only three, I can say 3 opioids which is available in India. Still we are not able to get sufentanil, alfentanil and all. I had an experience yesterday when an examiner asked me what other opioids you have. I told I have only 3 opioids in my hospital, in my whole India. He told okay. He was from Egypt, maybe he got more exposure to those things. Okay, next we'll be going for the next topic. It's topic on patient preparation for intervention and post-interventional care. This is very important because even we are so expert in interventions, if you are not prepared it well before the procedure, if you land in problems, then only realize, okay, I don't know how many have the habits of checking blood pressure before taking the patient. Still, I can talk a lot, but I do this mistake. When I take my patient inside, maybe it may be because of anxiety. When I take the patient inside, that time patient BP will having 210, 140. Okay. I will ask, are you hypertensive? No, I don't know. So I had checked your BP. They will say, yeah, your staff checked me before. It may be because of anxiety, but still we miss. So there are a lot of things we miss. Once we do the error, then only we realize, okay, we should have. Next time we will insist. Second time we will insist. Third time insist. But we never follow this procedure protocol. We never check for the consent. In the hurry, we used to miss it off. This is the one we just want to stress. I invite Dr. Alka Ragalkar. She is the practicing pain physician for the past 4 years. We had got a lot of pain speakers who are the first to start the pain clinic in the zone. I will tell, she is the first one to start. Previous speaker Ramamurthy is the first one to start on Mangalore. Now she is Dr. Alka Ragalkar. She is the first to start on Chhattisgarh, her own pain clinic. She had got special interest in spine, cancer pain and facial neuralgia. Ma'am, you can take your share.
No, it's okay.
We can go there. Which one, ma'am? Preparation.
Thank you, Dr. Gurumurthy, for kind introduction, and good good afternoon, everybody. As he rightly said, it's a very basic topic, yet very important. So, uh, everybody must, of you must have realized that whenever we want to organize anything, maybe a big event like this conference or a small birthday party, it needs lot of planning and hard work to be successful.
Hello.
And same holds true for the interventions as well. Somebody rightly said that job well begun is half done. So here are some tips to how to go about it and to make your interventions run successfully and smoothly. So what is the purpose of this preparation? We want to prepare not only the patient but ourselves, because we don't want any kind of surprises on the table, and also to maximize results without any complications, with minimum or no morbidity. In my opinion, the first 30 minutes when patient enters your office are the most important as far as preparation is concerned, because this gives you an opportunity to interact the patient, you evaluate the patient and analyze the complaints as well as the expectations of the patient. Chronic pain, as you all know, it needs multimodal approach. You just cannot compare it with simple appendicectomy or a cholecystectomy where you just remove the culprit and patient will never have the same kind of patient again. So you need to have a multimodal approach, and you should spend adequate time to impress upon the patient that other factors like physiotherapy, psychotherapy, stress management, lifestyle modifications, posture correction, weight reduction, and so on. All these things are equally important, and you need to address that when time comes. So establishing trustworthy relationship with the patient in first meeting is the key. Everybody of you must be are listening to the fact that evaluation is must, which includes detailed pain history, general history, to diagnose comorbid diseases, physical and psychological examination with relevant investigations. I will not go into the details of pain history, but it is important in these days of litigations, it is important that you must document the previous consultations, diagnosis, medication, and outcome. Many a times what happens, patient has some problem which needs intervention, but along with that he also has some kind of psychological problem which needs to be addressed first. So we must spend adequate time to assess the mental status of the patient. General history includes history for diabetes mellitus, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases, renal diseases, cancer, previous medication. True anaphylaxis, although it's a real entity, but it is rare. Most of the times what happens, patients confuse about the side effects of the drug with allergy. So we need to differentiate between the two, whether it's true anaphylaxis or it's an allergy. Also ask for previous surgery, hospitalization, addiction. And in my practice, what happens, at the back of your mind, it is there that this patient has come to me after visiting so many doctors, maybe 10 to 15, but yet there is a possibility that his real diagnosis has missed by all of them. So we need to keep an open mind. And physical examination, yes, it starts the moment patient enters your office, because general appearance and gait gives you the clue. And also examine all basic things. I will not go into the details. Yes, and your diagnosis should be supported by imaging techniques, different imaging techniques. Conventional radiograph, it still has a role to play. Please do not jump directly on CT or MRI. That's the only thing which I want to say. I will not go into the details. Yes, Uh, each one of us is practicing anesthesia or has practiced anesthesia. So this protocol remains the same. So we must order CBC, sugar, and platelet count, bleeding time, prothrombin time, and INR if the patient is on anticoagulants. And also ask for electrolytes and viral markers. And all should be corrected before the interventions. As we all know, we are playing with the needle, so it also carries risk of bleeding. There are procedures related factors, like if you are using a thick needle, sharp needle, or for some reason multiple passages are required, or you place the catheter for a long time. So it definitely increases the risk of bleeding and hematoma formation. So one has to be ready to manage, to diagnose them timely and to manage. Patient-specific risk factors include history of previous history of bleeding, like maybe surgical epistaxis, hematuria, or family history, or patient is on anticoagulant. One has to be very careful. Or different diseases like renal failure, liver failure, or SLE. It's also associated with increased risk of. Yes. Trigeminal ganglion balloon compression. It may result in facial weakness if patient has hematoma. Similarly, in sphenopalatine ganglion, patient may have cheek hematoma and epistaxis, and in neuroaxial procedures, the symptoms may be early or may be delayed. So one has to be watchful, and it may result in progressive sensory motor loss. So one needs to keep this thing in mind. You have analyzed the patient, you have evaluated, now you are ready. Now it's time to educate the patient. It is very, very, very important. We need to educate the patients regarding the procedure so as to allay their anxiety and fear, and also about the outcome. Most of the times, especially if the patient is referred to you by other doctor, they come with the mindset that you will be putting in a needle there and their pain will go forever. That is not the right thing, and one needs to explain them everything in realistic fashion, that how much, whether you are doing it for therapeutic purposes, diagnostic purposes, and how much relief they can expect. And again, you have educated, but it's important to take informed consent. That really saves your life. So one must take an informed consent which explains everything: purpose of treatment, procedure details, side effects, complications, if any, expected outcome. I'm repeating it again because this is very, very important, and success rate. And it should be duly signed by not only by the patient, but escort as well. And we must explain everything. Preferably, we must give a printed form. If the patients are educated, we can give a printed form and explain them about each and every small things, like fasting, whether to take drugs, which drugs to take, which not. Then arrival time, very important, because delay of 1 hour, half an hour may disturb your schedule. Regarding fasting, they should be asked not to take any solids or liquids 8 hours before. If the patient is diabetic or has hiatus hernia or gastric reflux, 6 hours fasting would be okay. They should be told that they should not take any painkillers on the day of procedures, as slight pain may be preferable while performing the procedure. And what if they do not have pain? They must report you, because procedure might need to be postponed. If the patient is diabetic, as this is all we are following. For AM appointments, half the dose of insulin. For PM appointments, they can have full dose with breakfast before 8 a.m. If the patient is on anticoagulants, it's important to ask them to consult their family doctor or a cardiologist whether they can discontinue their medicines around the time of procedure. NSAIDs, there are no restrictions, but if the patient is also taking anticoagulants, NSAIDs should be stopped 7 days prior. Similarly, warfarin and warfarin and clopidogrel should be stopped 7 days prior and ticlopidin 2 weeks before. For enoxaparin sodium, if the patient is on low dose therapy, it should be stopped 12 hours before, and similarly, post procedure dose will be 12 hours after. And if on high dose, one day before and 1 day after. If you discontinue benzodiazepines or antipsychotics suddenly, it may lead to hypertension and changes in mental status. So should be continued. As we all know, antihypertensives should be continued on the day of procedure. Corticosteroids, use of corticosteroids and neoplastic agents decrease immune response and increase the chances of infection. Patient should be instructed on every small things like what to do with their glasses, hearing aids, dentures. One must keep in mind that prosthetic joints may not be compatible with MRI. While you are prescribing for MRI, one must keep in mind RF should be avoided if the patient has a pacemaker, because it may interfere, the current may interfere with this thing. Preparation on the day of procedure, it's very important. Although we are performing all our procedures under local, even without sedation, one must check complete resuscitation facilities. And also, we must review the documents once again, because you might have given the appointment 8-10 days ago. So it's better to check the documents, confirm which side you want to give the injection, and also, especially if the OT is not tuned, check for the availability of all required consumables. You are ready, but steroid is not there. So this should not happen. And I prefer to prepare the gut before lumbar procedures, because in my opinion, in my experience, it definitely improves the fluoroscopic picture of the spine. Secure an IV line, record vitals, preload if you expect hypotension, as in sympathetic blocks, maybe say iliac plexus block. Then if the patient is very apprehensive, I find applying prilocaine and lignocaine jelly cream on the site.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
2 minutes to go.
Okay, it's done. It's done. Post-procedure care, we must observe the patient for 2 hours, monitor vitals, pain relief, sensory level, abdominal and urinary distension, bleeding at the site of entry, and also record level of agitation. You must observe and record. Both of the things are equally important. And patient must meet specific criteria before discharge. The patient should be awake and oriented with full muscle power, with stable vitals, should be able to ambulate without syncope and change in vitals, and we must discharge the patient with responsible adult escort, and they are not allowed to drive after the procedure. They should be given clear-cut instructions regarding follow-up date, medication, precautions. Appropriate and adequate instructions should be given to the escort as well, and also ask them to report if they notice some untoward signs and symptoms like fever, exacerbation of pain, sensory motor loss, or any other. Conclusion, I can say that adequate preparation of patient for intervention and post-intervention care is essential to maximize the results and minimize the complication rates. These are the references, and thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. So maybe we'll have some discussions in the end. Maybe some people will have some again pros and cons in these topics. So we'll have it at the end. You can mark it down so then we can discuss. Next, we'll be going to one of the most important thing. I can still remember when I went to a neurosurgeon and talked. I am a pain physician. He told, okay, fine. He asked me, what are the things you do? I told everything. He told, in 1980s itself, it was written, it was because of psychological. There are, our standard textbook has almost nearly 900 pages saying these chronic pains always some psychological things. I didn't answer him because he is the owner of that hospital. I don't want to fight with him. Maybe this may be my chance